Russian President Vladimir Putin struck a hard line over any deal to halt the fighting in Ukraine. This even as he said that he supports the idea behind a US-backed 30-day ceasefire. Putin has said he agrees with the idea of a ceasefire in Ukraine, but that question remains about the nature of a truce as he sets out a number of tough conditions for peace. Trump, meanwhile, has not ruled out sanctions against Russia if it does play hardball in the negotiations. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Zelensky has responded to Putin, urging US to sanction Russia in order to increase pressure at it. To decode the implications of this, I'm also going to be joined in by Lester Munson. But first up, we bring you a report.
С предложениями прекратить боевые действия.
Russian President Vladimir Putin said on Thursday that he was open to a U.S.-proposed ceasefire in Ukraine, but said many issues still needed clarification and that any truce would need to address what he called the root causes of the conflict.
Первоначальные причины этого кризиса.
A day earlier, Moscow presented the U.S. with a list of demands to end its war in Ukraine, including preventing Kiev from joining NATO, ruling out foreign troops in the country, and recognition of Russian sovereignty over 4 provinces it claims to have annexed. Earlier this week, American and Ukrainian officials agreed to an immediate 30-day ceasefire, and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that Russia's response to the offer would say a lot about Moscow's true intentions.
So we hope to have a positive answer from them. The ball is truly in their court.
Donald Trump had said in the White House on Wednesday that he hoped the Kremlin would agree to end what the U.S. president called a bloodbath.
And hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia, and if we do, I think that would be 80% of the way to getting this horrible bloodbath finished. It's a bloodbath.
Президента Соединенных Штатов, господина Трампа, за то,
Putin thanked Trump for his efforts to end the war and said he might call Trump to discuss the issue. If Putin's answer seemed diplomatic, Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov was more blunt when asked about the U.S. proposal for an immediate truce.
A temporary ceasefire. What does it give us? It gives us nothing. It only gives the Ukrainians an opportunity to regroup, gain strength, and to continue the same thing.
Putin sent tens of thousands of Russian troops into Ukraine in 2022 in what he called a special military operation, triggering the largest military conflict in Europe since World War II and the starkest confrontation between Moscow and the West since the end of the Cold War. After severe setbacks early in the invasion, Russian forces have been advancing since mid-2024 and control nearly a fifth of Ukraine's territory. And they seem close to completely retaking a piece of Russian territory in Kursk that Ukrainian forces captured last summer. In a sign of the Kremlin's growing confidence, Putin donned a military uniform for a visit to his commanders in Kursk on Wednesday and told them to finish the job, quote, in the shortest possible time frame. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is in Moscow Thursday to meet with Putin to further discuss the proposed ceasefire.
All right, let's try and get in some perspective. And for that, I'm joined in by Lester Munson, who's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute. Many thanks to you, Lester, for joining in. Now that Vladimir Putin is setting tough conditions, do you think that Washington will have to pressurize Moscow?
Well, I think to some extent that could be true, but that's in a way fool's gold. At the end of the day, what President Trump is interested in is a cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. He's not interested in facilitating the Russian takeover of all of Ukraine. So the idea that Trump's goals and Putin's goals are the same is just not correct. And I think to the extent the Russian people have embraced that, that's not what they should be doing. What they should be very realistic here. President Trump is looking to settle this conflict as quickly as possible. That may not be in Vladimir Putin's interest to do so. It may really put, if he agrees to that, it may really put him at risk from some of these hardliners in the Russian government. He's got to manage that relationship. So it's going to be interesting to see what the next few steps are here. Will President Trump increase pressure on Russia? Will he start talking again about sanctions and tariffs and that kind of thing, or other ways to kind of isolate Putin? It's really difficult to do that to him, given that there's already a whole raft of sanctions that have been imposed on Russia. So there's the next few steps here, I think, are going to kind of indicate to us whether this effort's going to be successful or not.
Well, absolutely. Those demands have already started coming in from the Ukrainian president. But Russia's advances along the front in recent months and US President Donald Trump's own attempt to strike a peace deal to end the 3-year-old conflict in Ukraine have also raised Kiev's own fears, which was so far backed by the West, that it could now lose the war as Donald Trump has stepped in. How do you weigh in on Ukraine's fears as well?
Well, I think that is to some extent a legitimate fear, just because that Oval Office meeting was so shocking. But I think once things calm down and people kind of put their emotional reactions aside, they realize that, again, President Trump is interested in ceasing hostilities. Once Ukraine, and it took a few days, but once President Zelensky and Ukraine agreed basically to President Trump's terms, and it is kind of interesting that this mineral deal has not been finalized yet, but essentially once Ukraine bought into the Trump plan, President Trump restored U.S. military assistance and intelligence sharing, which are so critical to Ukrainian efforts on the ground. He restored those avenues of U.S. assistance to Ukraine. So the United States is not really interested in seeing Ukraine lose. It is interested, again, in a ceasefire. This is something that doesn't really make either camp happy. And so it's come under a lot of criticism, but it is what the American people voted for in November, and that's why President Trump is executing on this plan.
Thanks to you, Lester Munson, for joining in on World 360.